long as the light's on, they can hear you.
Okay. And
Okay, I call this meeting of the Mount Vernon Landmark Commission to order. At the time is 5:24 p.m. We now have a quorum together. And we have just one item consent agenda. I asked for if you didn't read it, we can put it on the screen for you to read. Would you please roll the slide up? Thank you. Okay, we would entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Let it show it was unanimous. Okay. There's no old business, but we do have the consideration that was not acted on at the last meeting for the resignation of Patricia Wright from the board. Ms. Wright has said that she has put a strain on her health and has told me personally she's put a strain on her health, and she just has to reduce her activities in some way. So she's submitted her written resignation for consideration.
I move we accept her resignation.
We have a motion from Ralph to accept the resignation. Do we have a second? And Billy Jordan has seconded that motion. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
That was a unanimous aye. All right, our only other item of business was a submission for a consideration of putting a cow mural on the building behind the business on Scott Street. That's also off South Houston Street, actually second block. We've been informed by our city secretary that as of this afternoon, they have withdrawn their request. We had a picture, I think was part of your packet, for the mural that was requested, but we don't have to act on that. I would kind of like to have a little discussion or input from the board as to how they would feel about such things on buildings that have not previously had an agenda, a mural on them. If you haven't seen your packet, this was the one they were proposing.
It's like a movement, like with the cow.
Although it's a
I'm so stupid. I didn't see that was the world on there. And
It's the world.
yeah, okay. So, and
thanks for sending everything's come through email. You know, it's been fine, and I looked at it. I just didn't realize it was the world.
Worldcow.earth is the
Welcome. Welcoming Charlotte Roger, who is joining us for the meeting now. We were saying that as of this afternoon, the people that had made the submission for a request of putting this mural on have withdrawn their request, but I would like to seek the opinion of the board as to whether they would follow or like something like this on a building that did not previously have any kind of a mural on it.
What building is that?
Most of us old folks refer to it as the old egg building. It's the kind of cinder block building that's behind what used to be the gas office.
I think it might have been.
All right, it's actually parallels the ones that are on the front of Scott Street. And it's only really visible from that stop sign, the west end of it. They never even really specified where it was to be located, but I kind of feel like it was going to be on the west end of that other building. It had been previously painted. Of course, one of our big faux pas that we try to discourage people from doing is painting brick. But this is cinder block, but as I said, it wasn't the old style brick, because painting brick on the regular style brick prevents the building from breathing and causes water collection problems. But that is not even a real consideration, I don't believe, in this particular instance. But how do y'all feel about it?
I personally feel like it's in an area of relatively low traffic. I don't know. Quite frankly, I question how historical the building is. I think it would probably be, given knowing that family, and knowing their purpose, and knowing that, in fact, the applicant's father is a lay minister. I feel like that, you know, their intent is to promote their cause, and I think it's a worthy cause, and I personally see no problem with it.
Well, that being said, but I'm really just talking about what is your feelings about putting a mural where none previously existed, and should it be, if it were a historic building with brick rather than a cinder block, would you be in favor of doing it because it would require painting that brick?
Yeah, if that might be certainly a different consideration, assuming that the building would have been repurposed similar to the old Watermelon Mills building. Yeah, that may have been a different consideration.
They basically did stucco on the one that has a major mural on it at the building you were talking about. BF, you were about to say something?
So, Milano's Pizza. Now, I don't know if that mural is still showing up or not. It's still there. Okay. So, if you've got historic murals in place, no problem with that. And I really hadn't thought about Lily's posing the question. But Ralph, for instance, on the side of where that laundry is, which was Nelva C's abstract company, built by Raymond Hill in 1935. So that's never had a mural. So the problem I would have is, I mean, it shouldn't. I don't think it should have a mural. But that egg house is so nondescript down there. I'm not bothered one way or the other. And in fact, I thought it was fine just having I thought it was a Holstein cow and just kept on going and didn't realize I was looking at the world. But to me, if it adds some local color and it's interesting to people, and now that we've got Annetta, also the State Historic Commission is going to offer you, if you've gone, I don't know if you've been through Main Street training yet, but we can bring up design people here and all that through what you now head up. So I think Lily's a little more hesitant than I am, but it's concrete block, and I think that was painted white. There's a picture about 1946. Yeah, it was painted.
Yeah,
with a
yes,
lot of
it
white
has
paint,
been
so.
previously
I think it had the name
painted.
of the business
Oh, okay,
there at
so.
one time, BF, as I remember.
Okay. So I'm not.
I was telling Lily, I was 11 years old when we moved here, and it was in business then as a produce and egg
Yeah. So.
cooler.
Right, I do think we the only precedent is if we had something. This is a National Historic District, and so the stuff that actually faces the town square. Sure, I'm not in favor of murals or anything out that really does much to change anything that what we've got. This is a really rare status to a National Historic District, but and we're not supposed to change anything. But I'm not bothered, Lily, one way or the other, and. I guess I'm seconding Ralph. I'm just like, I was thinking, well, we already had one anyway, but yeah, you can go by something every day of the week and not know it's there, and so I guess it's still there. You're telling me. Yeah.
Billy, do you have a comment?
I have no problem with it being on that building. No, I do not.
But what about generally speaking, as far as putting murals on buildings in the downtown area?
I think it'd have to be case by case. I agree with BL. I don't think around our historical area it's appropriate, other than the one that's already there, and that's been there a long time. Absolutely.
I will go on record saying that I'm not in favor of putting it on any historic or building or one in the historic district, for that matter, if it requires the brick being painted and it hasn't previously been painted. If it's previously been painted, again, that is a case-by-case basis. And the design, we would need to see and approve, as you said, it's case-by-case. But that's my only problem. I have frequently had a number of folks that have approached me about doing one thing and another, and I generally just wanted to be able to say, I don't have generally I do not have the consensus of the board to do anything like that. And as a matter of fact, it would be on a case-by-case basis. Just gives me something to say. How about you, Charlotte? Do you have any comment?
No, everything's fine with me.
Okay, that being said, it just gives me me and Annetta something to work from. Do we want that?
I would move to approve.
We have a motion from Ralph to approve and a second from BF. Should they decide, change their mind and come back and want to do that. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving such a move by this person with this particular mural? Aye? Aye. We have a unanimous vote in favor.
Okay. Hello and welcome.
The only other thing is that we are required by state to meet quarterly, and they are advising us we need to, or have advised me, that we need to do some kind of training. We have a 12-minute video. I think we can manage to sit through that, and we'll try to keep whatever we do in the future, unless we have one of the state folks that can join us for a more involved training, to the short amount of time that we have here. So are we ready to roll with that video?
Welcome to this History at Night webinar. History at Night is an ongoing speaker series hosted by Friends of San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site. My name is Eleanor Stoddart, and I'm the educator here at San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site, and I'm going to be your host this evening. Tonight, the topic is Flags of the Texas Revolution with the lead educator from San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site, Kate Johnson. This webinar will be recorded and posted online on our Facebook page, the YouTube video of the Texas Historical Commission, and our website. If you have any questions during this evening's discussion, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. We have staff members who may be able to answer your queries there, but we'll also share as many questions as we can with Kate after our discussion is through. We'll also share our contact information at the conclusion of this webinar. And as well, if you'd like to let us know where you're tuning in from, please let us know in the chat section. Before we get into Kate's presentation, I'd like to spend a little bit of time introducing her. Kate has been the lead educator at San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site for just over 2.5 years. Before that, she has lived in a bunch of places. And in fact, we've even created a map to make it easier to keep track. She earned a bachelor's degree in anthropology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a master's degree in public history from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Now, following her university education, she taught elementary school English in South Korea for a few years. Then she joined the Peace Corps, serving in Morocco there, and where she focused on youth development. After that, she moved on to Alaska, completing two seasonal terms in Kotzebue with the National Park Service. Most recently, she has written 4 short movies that premiered this week. So check out San Jacinto, A Lone Star Shines, available on the San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site Facebook page and on the Texas Historical Commission's YouTube channel. She also wanted me to remind you that the monument is open again on Wednesdays through Sundays from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And now with that, we are going to turn this over to Kate, and let's begin our look at flags of the Texas Revolution.
All right, and let's see if I can't share my screen properly this time. Did y'all see a PowerPoint presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right, so like Eleanor said, I'm Kate Johnson. I'm the lead educator at San Jacinto Battleground. We're in La Porte, Texas, so I'm just on the other side of Houston from San Felipe. So if you haven't come out to visit us, you definitely should at some point. And then before I start, I want to make a couple of notes. So first, I'm really focusing here on the flags of the Texas Revolution. So really starting mid-1835, running through the end of 1836. And I know there are a lot of flags before that kind of stretch into the Texas Revolution period. I know there are a lot of flags that come afterwards that have their origins in the Texas Revolution period. But with the exception of talking about the Lone Star flag, I'm really just focused on kind of that year and a half, because otherwise we would be here all night. Like, I got to draw a perimeter somewhere. So I apologize if I'm leaving out a flag that you're interested in. And maybe try to expand it later at some point. And I'm also, for this talk, just focused on the Texian flags. And we all know there's a whole second side of the revolution. There's a bunch of Mexican flags flying here. Actually, most of the flags that have survived the Texas Revolution are the Mexican flags. 4 were captured here at San Jacinto. But for this talk, I'm just focusing on the Texian ones. I'm going to go roughly in chronological order based on when the flags were created, not necessarily the events they are best associated with. And then a note to some of the sources, there is going to be a lot of speculation. Almost none of these flags survive. There's very few contemporary sources. So a lot of what we have to rely on was written long after the fact, and some of it wasn't even written by eyewitness accounts. So I'm going to try and be very clear about where I'm getting information from, where there is controversy, and where I am sharing my own opinion versus where I am sharing what is as best to my ability to determine what we know is fact. And then just a couple of notes on why bother? Why look at flags? What's the importance of flags? We don't know a ton about them. Why is it worth studying? And I do think it is, because they're a way that we create an identity. They speak a lot to what people's mindsets are. And during this kind of 6-7 month revolution, people's mindsets shift a lot. And I think it's really interesting looking at how these flags change over this period of time to see how Texian opinions are starting to change as well. So I will start at the very beginning. So September 1835. The first flag of this period is either the Dodson flag or the Lynchburg flag, but I arbitrarily chose the Dodson flag to start with. So it was created by Sarah Dodson sometime in September of 1835 in Harrisburg for Captain Andrew Robinson's militia company. Her husband served as their first lieutenant. It was made out of calico and consisted of either either squares or rectangles, but either way, it was a much narrower flag than what we are traditionally used to. Blue, white, and red with a white lone star in the middle of that blue square. And when Lieutenant Dodson unveiled the flag to the company, he told them that the single star was like Texas, alone in her opposition to the government that was established by Santa Anna. So what I'm saying, it's a way to look at it, what people are feeling about the Texas Revolution. I mean, Lieutenant Dodson kind of straight up says this is an opposition to Santa Anna. It's an opposition to this centralist government. It's not necessarily talking about independence. However, when the Harrisburg Company arrived in Gonzales, Stephen F. Austin was worried that the flag was so revolutionary that he actually ended up asking them not to fly it for a little bit because he was concerned if the government commander in Behar saw it, it would be seen as like a declaration of independence. But he ends up changing his mind, and the Harrisburg Company does march under the Dodson flag to Behar. It might have been raised over San Antonio after the city was captured. And they weren't really sure what happens to it. For a couple of months, it disappears and then reappears in Washington on the Brazos in March of 1836. It's one of two flags that flew over Independence Hall during the General Convention. The next flag from about the same time period, about the same place, is the Lynchburg flag. And Lynchburg is actually like a mile from where I'm currently sitting in my office. So very close to where Harrisburg was. September 1835, William Scott, the captain of the Lynchburg militia, gave his second lieutenant, a guy named James McGahee, and I'm mostly basing this off of McGahee's account that he wrote several decades later, gave McGahee 4 yards of blue silk and told him to have a flag made. So he goes to Frances Lynch. She sews a piece of cloth on the back of it so it would be a little bit more stable. And he takes it to a local painter named Charles Lanco, and Lanco paints that white star in the center of it. So according to McGahee's account, once the star was painted, Lanco looks at him and goes, well, now that looks naked. Let me paint something else under it. What should it be? And McGahee told him to paint the word independent. So we just talked about the Dodson flag, which is in opposition to Santa Anna, to his government, not necessarily in favor of independence. Lynchburg flag has gone the way opposite direction. And even at this really early stage in the revolution, there were people who were arguing for complete and total independence. It was not, some people really liked it. There was a story about a group of volunteers on their way to San Felipe, and they saw the flag and they told him it's just the course for the state of Texas to take. But others really disagreed with it. So a militia company in Harrisburg, and I could not find any reference whether this was the Robinson Company that had the Dodson flag or if it was a separate one. But they were so upset about it, they threatened to shoot any man who attempted to raise a flag with the word independence on it before independence was declared by the proper authorities.
Hello, I'm Leslie Wolfenden, the Texas Historical Commission's Historic Resources Survey Coordinator. Today we are going to discuss modern architecture. Since modern architecture of the 20th century is coming into its own and is considered to be historic, I'll be covering where modern architecture came from, what it is, and how it evolved over time. Modern architecture began in the early 20th century with roots in the 19th century. It was an effort to reconcile principles underlying architectural design with rapid technological advancement and modernization of society. The modern architecture time period ranges roughly from the 1900s to the 1980s. In the early 1900s, there was an evolution of thought in the European schools of design, kick-starting the modern movement. And by the 1980s, modern architecture transitions over to postmodernism. Modern architecture encompasses many different styles, including Art Deco, Art Moderne, Stripped Classicism, International Style, Mid-Century Modern, Googie, New Formalism, and Brutalism. There are others that were more popular in Europe that we won't cover here today, such as Futurism, Constructivism, and Expressionism. The exact definition and scope of modern architecture varies widely, but the characteristics include simplification of form, creation of ornament from structure and theme of the building, and it takes the form of numerous movements, schools of design, and architectural styles. Design should derive directly from its purpose. In other words, form follows function, as famously quoted by Louis Sullivan. It should include simplicity and clarity of form and elimination of unnecessary detail. As Mies van der Rohe said, God is in the details. It is a visual expression of structure. Modern architecture values the truth of materials. The true nature or natural appearance of a material ought to be seen, rather than concealed or altered. Industrial-produced materials are used as an adoption of the machine aesthetic. Horizontal and vertical lines are emphasized. Notable architects include Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, Le Corbusier, and Oscar Niemeyer, among others. Notable schools of design and portfolios were extremely important to the history and development of the modernist movement. Of notable influence include the Deutscher Werkbund from 1907 with Peter Behrens, Joseph Hoffmann, and Bruno Paul. The Vassmuth Portfolio of 1910. This was Frank Lloyd Wright's lithographs of his works from 1893 to 1909. This was the first publication of his work anywhere. There is a significant link between Wright's American architecture and the first generation of modernist architects in Europe. De Stijl of the Netherlands from 1917 includes Theo van Doesburg, Piet Mondrian, and Gerrit Rietveld. The Bauhaus from 1919, this includes Walter Gropius, Hannes Meyer, and Mies van der Rohe. The Harvard Five of the 1940s, which was influenced by Walter Gropius, included John Johansson, Marcel Breuer, Lenis Gors, Philip Johnson, and Elliot Noyes. And the Case Study Houses, which were experiments in American residential architecture. This was sponsored by the Arts and Architecture magazine to design and build inexpensive and efficient model homes. Architects involved were Richard Neutra, Charles and Ray Eames, and Eero Saarinen. The modernist styles developed through a combination of thoughts, including results of social and political revolutions driven by technological and engineering developments, and as a matter of taste as a reaction against eclecticism and the lavish stylistic excesses of Victorian and Edwardian architecture, as seen on this slide. Technological advancements was part of the driving force of the modernist movement. The Industrial Revolution brought iron, steel, and glass. In the early 1830s, the section beam was invented by Eaton Hodgkinson. This led to widespread use of iron construction, as it allowed for longer spans and less wall. It replaced load-bearing masonry and wood framing. An early example of this is seen in the Crystal Palace at the Great Exposition in London in 1851. This was designed by Joseph Paxton. This led to the first curtain wall, made of glass and metal, seen here at the Oriel Chambers in Liverpool in 1864. This was designed by Peter Ellis. You can still see the influence of traditional architecture with the pediment and masonry details. The first fully steel-framed building was the 10-story Home Insurance Building in Chicago, built in 1885. This is regarded as the first skyscraper and was designed by William Jenney. This building weighed a third as much as a 10-story masonry building. Using this method allowed the possibility to construct even taller structures. The modern style is characterized by the adoption of the machine aesthetic, glorification of technological advancement in new materials, adopting or loosely retaining revivalist forms and motifs, and the continued use of ornament. The 1925 World's Fair was held in Paris. This exposition epitomized what came to be called decades later Art Deco, a modern style characterized by streamlined classicism, geometric and symmetric compositions, and a sleek machine-age look. The term Art Deco was derived by shortening the words arts décoratifs. Characteristics of the Art Deco style include stylized plant and animal motifs, and hard-line angular geometric patterning in exterior and interior ornament, vertical molded ornamentation, decorative parapet and cornice, ornamental door and window surrounds, metal sash windows, and polychromatic decorative glass or glazed brick. Art moderne was popular from the 1930s to the 1950s. It encompassed the machine aesthetic, aerodynamic imagery of transportation, with rounded corners, curved windows, metal sash windows, smooth wall surfaces highlighted with metal trim, irregular plan and asymmetrical facade, flat roofs, and glass block walls and windows. During the Depression era of the 1930s and 40s, stripped classicism became popular. This was also known as PWA moderne and WPA moderne. Commonalities of this style include symmetrical facades, smooth wall surfaces, flat roofs, plain, narrow cornices, projecting pavilions, vertical molded ornamentation, framed entrances, piers without capitals, and metal sash windows. World War II was a major factor in driving innovations in building technology and architectural possibilities. Material shortages led to the adoption of new materials and advancement of old ones. Surplus post-war industrial capacity would accelerate materials and techniques. There was rapid demand for structures during the war and for housing after the war. World War II was a pivotal point in U.S. history. There was a shift from rural to urban populations and the start of urban sprawl, subdivisions, and separation of uses. There were accelerated experiments with prefabricated buildings, such as the Quonset hut seen at the top, Lustron houses at the bottom left, and the Dymaxion house or geodesic dome, bottom right. From the 1920s to the 60s, the international style was a combination of many distinct threads and trends in architecture, identified as stylistically similar and having a common purpose. Of particular importance was the 1932 International Exhibition of Modern Architecture, held at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It was organized by Philip Johnson and Henry Russell Hitchcock, who coined the term international style. The international style became the preeminent style in institutional and commercial architecture in the United States. The emphasis was on volume rather than mass, and balance as opposed to preconceived symmetry. There was a dependence on intrinsic elegance of materials, technical perfection, fine proportions, and the elimination of applied ornament. The international style was a break from architectural tradition, with simple, unornamented designs, and the use of common materials such as glass for facades, steel for exterior support, and concrete for floors and interior support. The floor plans were functional and logical. As a reaction to the purely functional form of the international style, the mid-century modern came into being in the 1930s and lasted to the 1960s. It experimented with organic forms that were more human and accessible. It was popular for its democratic and playful nature. It made structural advancements in the use of reinforced concrete, concrete shell construction, and the geodesic dome. Preeminent architects of this style include Eero Saarinen and Alvar Aalto. Inspired by imagery of the atomic age and the space age, the Googie style came into being. It used atomic orbital patterns, flying saucers, upswept roofs, geometric shapes, starbursts, and the bold use of glass, steel, and neon. On the whole, it originated out of California in the late 1940s and was more or less exclusive to the United States. Googie heavily influenced retrofuturism, appropriately exemplified in the Jetsons cartoon and Disney's Tomorrowland. Googie was used for diners, movie theaters, motels, gas stations, cafes, and car washes. The eye-catching shapes, colors, and lighting were essentially architectural billboards advertising the businesses to vehicles on the road. In direct contrast to Googie's exuberance, new formalism emerged in the 1950s and lasted through the 1970s. It blended elements of classicism, seen in the rigid symmetry, use of columns or arcades, and high-end materials, with the international style. Another architectural style that responded to the international style was brutalism that flourished from the 1950s to the 70s. It was popular for creating works of monumental quality, such as government and institutional buildings. The emphasis is on more substantial materials, such as concrete and brick. These buildings were typically massive in character and fortress-like, to create an image that communicated strength, functionality, and frank expression of materiality. The word brutalism derives from béton brut, meaning raw concrete. There are other forms of modern architecture, such as futurism, constructivism, and expressionism, but these were more commonly seen in Europe rather than the United States. Modern architecture is now within the 50-year time period that is considered historic by the National Register of Historic Places. So these types of buildings need to be included in historic resources surveys and be evaluated for significance and integrity. By the 1980s, modern architecture transitions over to postmodernism as a response to the perceived blandness and failed utopianism of the modern movement. Postmodernist architecture was one of the first aesthetic movements to openly challenge modernism as antiquated and totalitarian, favoring personal preference and variety over objective ultimate truths or principles. It rejects the notion of pure form or perfect architectonic detail, instead conspicuously drawing from all methods, materials, forms, and colors available to architects. Notable architects include Michael Graves, Frank Gehry, Philip Johnson, and Robert Venturi. My contact information is on this slide. This concludes the presentation on modern architecture. Thank you for joining me, and I hope that this presentation was helpful.
You have any comments or questions about this from our board? We have tentatively set our quarterly meetings to be the first month of each new quarter, either the first or like it here, we couldn't get a quorum on the first Wednesday, so we are doing the third Wednesday of the month, which is the first month in the new quarter. So at least March or the next one should be on July 20th, again Wednesday. So you can mark your calendars, please, for that one for sure. Of course, we may, depending on applications, have another meeting before that. I will say that I was approached by Martin Sanchez and his wife Kim about changes that they want to make to the old Optic Herald building. We can't formally discuss that. If anybody's interested, there's no application yet, but they do have some preliminary drawings if anybody is interested in seeing those. If there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a motion from Billy and a second from Ralph to adjourn the meeting.